chaos theory has been applied to a number of concepts in science and mathematics. All complex systems have been said to be chaotic. As we said before, a football match, right? The first kick of a game, right? The first kick of a game will determine the rest of the game. Obviously, players have to be, they have to have skill and everything else, and a better team will usually win. But that first kick will determine when the first goal is scored or not. Traffic flow. If you're stopped at traffic lights, does that mean that you're going to be later, or does it mean that you're simply going to be diverted off and avoid something that a complication that's going to come later on? If you make the traffic lights, you think you're going to get there quicker, but perhaps it means you're going to get caught up in, God forbid, lower lane or an accident. Who knows? We can't predict it. We don't know. The stock market is also always seen as chaotic because it depends on people's decisions across the world. So all of these things are chaotic systems. They all have a complexity for which it is impossible to determine where things are going to happen in the future. And in fact, as I said before, every decision that we make, consciously and subtly, will affect everything that happens to us in our lives. Most of the decisions that we make, and we'll in fact touch on this in one of the later talks, are in fact subconscious. Okay? We very rarely make conscious decisions.
Can we call that the what if factor?
Yeah, we could, and it's very interesting to ask what if, but it actually doesn't help anyone, because who knows what if? And as we'll get to more of the philosophy later on, looking back at a person's life and saying to themselves, what if I made a different decision over here? How would my life have turned out? Is not a terribly helpful question to ask, because nobody has the ability to go back and undo things that they made, decisions that they made, and God is behind a lot of this anyway. So as we'll see shortly, this is going to be very important in understanding our relationship with God, and also, as I said before, some very sensitive subjects, why certain things will happen to certain people, and why other people will go through life like a breeze, and everything will be hunky-dory. So it leads to a fascinating question. Is the complex system of life merely random, or is there a guiding hand that helps to arrange things? Right? Let's say, for example, you have a chance meeting with a stranger on the street. How many different factors led to that meeting? What significance does that meeting have? And you meet someone that you haven't seen for 20 years, and that takes you in a whole different direction. Think of any possible idea that you have in your whole life, and any of those things could be factors that take you into a different direction. Okay, so we've already settled with this. The other question that we're going to ask, in turn, we know it relates to the idea of divine providence. Divine providence being God's interaction with this world. So how does God interact in this world? Can we understand God being part of this world and changing creation in some way to bring about a particular purpose? Or is God sort of divorced from the running of the world? Does God sort of just sit there and watch things happen? In turn, how does it affect the idea of free will? That I have the ability to choose, I have the ability to make choices for myself. Okay. And also, we'll touch, because it's coming up to Purim, on the idea of miracles as well. Okay, so these are the questions that we're going to try to answer. And also, can we relate any of this in any way to the idea of reward and punishment? We might leave that for this evening, but we may get there. Let's look at the Baal Shem Tov. A very interesting quote that he has, a very beautiful quote in Keter Shem Tov. He says the following: "We've learned in the lessons of our teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, that all creations are overseen by God in every small detailed matter, each one according to its merit. God directs many causes and pretexts in order to carry out a particular action relevant to that creation. All of it is through divine providence that can in actuality be sensed. For in the middle of a bright summer's day on which the sun is shining with all its might, suddenly a strong wind is awoken which moves the leaves on a tree, breaking some off and then separates some straw from the thatched roof, which rolls to the ground moving from place to place. For a few moments the wind quietens, and it is as if it had never been. For the purpose of that strong wind had a pretext and purpose directed from God to detach the leaves of the tree and remove the straw from that roof, and to move the leaves and the straw from one place to another in order to carry out a decree of providence from on high for the sake of God's object. the movement of these leaves of this straw which blows in the street or the field is caused by divine providence. What's the Baal Shem Tov saying? What is he getting at? All sorts of very mundane things happen all of the time. Most of them we don't even see. If a leaf falls off a tree and it lands this way or this way, a little piece of straw that comes off a roof, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't interest us. And yet the Baal Shem Tov is saying to God, these things that look like they're totally mundane, they're totally useless or pointless or have no purpose to them whatsoever, in fact, this could be God changing creation in some way in order to bring about his divine plan. Very quiet.
Okay, for the sake of God's objective.
Yeah. For the sake of God's objective.
The objective.
What is the objective? That's a good question. I mean, there is not one answer to that question. What is God's purpose for creation? I mean, there is on the one hand the fact that he created us with free will, with the ability to choose, and that he wants us to choose to do good. It says so explicitly in the Torah. Right? I've set before you good and evil. Choose good. Choose life.
Yeah, but by moving the decimal point 2 places to the left, and going back to the Kelsey,
Yes.
it's a little movement is going to, in the scheme of things, possibly, and we don't know, alter things.
Right. Right. So we don't know.
We don't know.
What the Baal Shem Tov is saying is that God does know.
Okay.
God is not just very clever, he is omniscient, he knows everything. So when we had that problem with the roulette wheel, because we can't even know how many variables we're supposed to measure, let alone be able to measure them, God knows it 100%. He doesn't have to measure something, he knows it. He knows where that ball is going to end up before it even gets thrown out of the hat. So from his perspective, exactly. From his perspective, he knows what to tweak. He knows that that leaf falling off the tree, landing this way or this way, is going to make all the difference. It's going to matter. It's going to make that difference. And the Baal Shem Tov seems to indicate that God sort of uses this principle to be able to mold and shape the purpose of creation to bring about a certain effect. Right? He says that the idea of this leaf looks to us as, it's nothing, but it's a pretext for God. From our perspective, it's meaningless because we cannot know what difference that's going to make. We cannot know. When we sit there at breakfast and we're thinking, shall I have Rice Krispies or cornflakes? Right? You could think to yourself, well, if I choose Rice Krispies, maybe in 50 years' time, it's going to cause World War III. And I need to choose the cornflakes and not the Rice Krispies. So how are you going to tell? Who knows? Who knows what effect it's going to have? It's going to have 1,000 different effects, 100,000. We don't know. That's not our domain. Had porridge, much better. There are, in fact, very good actually, because there are, in fact, this plugs into the other question that perhaps we were going to get to later on, but now you've asked the question. Let's get it. You didn't even know you asked the question, but you have asked the question. What about decisions that are not mundane decisions, that are not things that are, like a leaf falling off a tree like this or this, or which colour socks you put on in the morning, or which breakfast cereal? What about big decisions? And I don't mean big decisions like which university should I study at, or which area should I live in, that clearly have a massive effect on a person's life. I'm talking about decisions that God indicates to us are either positive or negative, moral or immoral, mitzvahs or averos. So there, God indicates to us that doing a particular act is a good thing. So when we choose to do that act that's good, whatever it happens to be, we know that from God's perspective, it's bringing us to a better place. That's a very deep understanding of the Mishnah in Perek Yavos that says, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward for doing a mitzvah is the opportunity to do greater mitzvahs, to connect further with God. And the corollary is that the same thing is true for doing an avera. When a person falls, it could be that it's taking them into another direction. We do know that when God tells us that this thing is positive and this thing is negative, those decisions we do have a handle on. And that is the only place in which we have free will. We don't have free will to choose a breakfast cereal, okay? Because we don't have control over what effect that has. We do have free will in areas of mitzvahs and averas, of connecting with God or disconnecting with God, which are the equivalent of those two things.
So consequences.
Because God tells us there are going to be consequences. Yeah.
On a light-hearted note.
On a light-hearted note. Good, thank you.
To quote Woody Allen,
Woody Allen.
man makes plans and God laughs.
Man makes plans and God laughs. 100%. 100%. You know? And this is very interesting because it's going to take us into a very interesting place. Now, the truth is, I used to teach the Ramchal. I'm not going to teach it this evening. If you want, I'll send you the... in Derech Hashem, he talks about God overseeing everything. He takes it in a slightly disturbing direction, which I don't want to get into now, because he implies that the direction that God will lead a person is sort of determined by his merits or his dismerits, and that has a number of disturbing implications. Okay? But what I do want to look at is the idea of free will and God's control. Okay? God, in fact, has a plan for the world. Derech Hashem, the Ramchal says that even man's deeds are not all the result of his free will. Meaning we think we're in control. We think we're in control. And yet, it's almost like our free will exists, but it's limited to a very small area, like we just said. Okay? So while this is true for most of his actions, there are some that result from a divine decree to reward or punish him. Now, when he uses the word punish, oynesh in Hebrew means to punish somebody. It doesn't mean that, you know, when I'm walking down Gold's Green Road and I've got the option of going into a nice kosher, you know, burgers bar or whatever you have, burgers bar, you have the White House, right? Gold's Green Road. Or I could, you know, go to the drive-through McDonald's. And, you know, I'm very hungry and the White House has got very long queues and the drive-through is very easy. And I go and I fail and I go to McDonald's and I get my cheeseburger and I'm, you know, as I'm about to eat my cheeseburger like this, and suddenly a lightning bolt comes out from heaven and strikes me now. Okay? That works for a lot of Jewish jokes, but it doesn't work in reality. It's not how it works. God is not there sort of waiting around the corner to pounce out on us, to punish us like that. That's not how it works. Doing an Avera means distancing yourself from God, doing something that desensitizes you to something. So when it talks about punishment, it means, that punishment means a distance from God. Let me explain it a different way. Let's just go. Here we go. It says providence is midah connected. Midah means measure for measure. This is a quote from Leviticus, which is in the Tochacha, the curses. It says, if you behave casually, in the word keri, with me, and refuse to listen to me, then I will lay a blow on you 7 like your sins. Now this word keri is a very interesting word. What does it mean, behave casually? So, sorry, I'm going to have to explain without Rashi. Rashi says, it means b'mikra. It means, the word keri is b'mikra. Mikra means happenstance. What this is teaching you is that if you believe that the world is simply a set of random events, that we're all bumping into one another and it's all meaningless and there's nothing really to it, God isn't there, that means behaving towards God casually. So when I have that chance meeting with an old friend from 20 years ago I haven't seen, and it brings us together and we form a business together and we make millions of pounds, I say to myself, wow, that meeting, that chance meeting was just by chance. Just think of how many myriads of random events it took to bring us together, and it's all random, and we're in control because we got that business going. And to divorce God from all of that, you know, to say that God wasn't there helping us and bringing us together, is to behave towards God casually, with keri. So what will happen? So I think Rashi says that if you behave towards God with keri, with happenstance, with b'mikra, you say that there is no system, God will behave towards you in kind. If that's the world you want to live in, a world of randomness where everything is just bumping around into one another, then fine, so you can live in that world, that's no problem. God will simply divorce himself from your life. No hashgacha pratis, no divine providence. If, however, you see every event as being significant, every decision that you've made that's brought you to a particular place, the growth in your life, you look back in your life and you see a certain pattern, and you sense God's hand bringing you through that each and every day, then God will be there and He'll behave towards you as if He's there, because He will be there. So this is what it's midah connected midah. Now, how does that relate to the idea of miracles? Okay, so we're about to celebrate Purim. Here is one of a myriad of verses from Megillah Esther that I could have quoted, but I just happened to quote this. Everyone knows the story of Purim, of course. Okay, Achashverosh has a party. Vashti is asked to appear. She decides not to. They kill her. Right. They also send out a decree to everybody that they should tell, to make sure that the women in Persia don't start to get a little above themselves, so that all men should be in charge of their household. And of course, as a result, Achashverosh looks for another wife, and it just so happens that Esther is brought by Mordechai, and she's put through this whole preparation process. She wins the heart of Achashverosh. Okay. Do I need to go on? You all know the story, right? No. There's one personality that is not mentioned in Megillah Esther. Hashem. So it's one of the miracles. Every Purim, we say Al HaNisim. In the same way we do on Hanukkah. Hanukkah is obvious. Hanukkah, we had a thing of oil. The oil was supposed to last for 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. Open miracle. So where are the miracles in the Purim story?
There is. It's inferred.
What's
For instance, Mordechai says, if you're not there, why were you put there to help the Jewish people?
It's a series of events.
It's a series of events. Very good.
I saw it depicted once in a graph, with a Megillah written in a graph, and it reached the pinnacle and then...
Very good. It does. It absolutely does. The whole Megillah, by the way, it's called a chiatic structure. Okay, you can look it up on Google afterwards. It's not the subject this evening. There are many chiatic structures in Tanakh. They were in fact discovered by a monk, if I'm not mistaken, but they are real. And they appear in all sorts of different places. Some of them in very short periods of Tanakh. Megillah Esther is one gigantic chiatic structure. It means it goes, you start from A, you go A, B, C, D, and then it reaches a pinnacle and goes D, C, B, A, and it goes like that. Okay? So you start off at the beginning with having a big party, you end up with having a big party. Okay? In the middle of Megillah Esther, you have the 6th chapter, which is where everything is hafuch, everything changes around, and everything that looked like it was going in one direction goes in another direction.
It's a movie script.
It is a movie script. It's a great movie script, but there's no miracles. There are no open miracles in Megillah Esther. So where are the miracles?
You said it.
Huh? What did I say?
You said when you were just roughly going through the story that just so happened that Esther was the one chosen. No, not just so.
Of course it's not just so happened. Of course not. And every step of the way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there guiding this story. But the fact is that we don't see it. Now this is very interesting. This is very interesting. This is one of the moments in Megillah Esther. Okay, this of course is that this is when Mordechai is waiting outside, right, in the chotzer, in the courtyard, and he overhears Bigtan and Teresh plotting to kill the king. Now they're speaking in a foreign language, right? The Megillah doesn't say so. Just so happens that Mordechai knows all 70 languages because he's a member of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. And the halacha is that you're not allowed to receive testimony through a translator. So you have to know all the languages that are brought that people could bring. So he knows the language. So he overhears them and he hears that they're plotting and he goes and tells the king. Now, let's just see the Malbim as to how many fine points are put on this. And it was written. It was divine providence that King Achashverosh had not given Mordechai as a reward for saving him immediately, but only written it in his book of remembrances, because of course it's not until chapter 6 that he gets his book out and he's reading, because he's awake at night time, and he's reading through, and then Haman comes in and he says, "Oh, Haman, what should you do for such a person that we should honor?" And Haman thinks he's talking about him, and he says, "Oh, put him on the horse and put him in the king's clothes and lead him through Shushan." And then it all switches around and he says, "Fine, do all of that for Mordechai," right? This is what happens. He could have rewarded Mordechai straight away, but he didn't. He wrote it in a book of remembrances. because God knew that we were going to need that favor later on. He also says it was divine providence that ensured it was not written in a general book of Chronicles that was kept by the second in command, because that was Haman. For he would have certainly erased Mordechai from it, or he would have played down the whole thing. It was written in the king's special book of Chronicles, which Haman would not have had access to. And in addition, it was written in front of the king before him, because if it hadn't, the scribe could have downplayed Mordechai's role. All of those things, as the Malbim, that's all divine providence. Everything in that story is divine providence, but we don't see it. So we say over here in Modim, we say, you're probably used to it, we say it in every Amida, we gratefully thank you, Modim Anachnu Lach, for it's you that are Hashem, our God, the God of our forefathers, for all eternity, rock of our lives. You are shield of our salvation from generation to generation. We should thank you, relate praise for our lives which are committed to your power, and for our souls that are entrusted to you. For the miracles that you do for us every day. So I don't know about you, but I spend my whole day doing a variety of different things. None of them can be classed as miracles. And yet, we say about there are miracles with us every day. So what are those miracles? Sorry, let's think about it a minute before we conclude. In Megillah Esther, we read a story. It could be our story, it could be the story of our lives. It's a mundane story that gets exciting, it looks like it's going in one direction, it goes in a different direction, but it's got no input apparently from God, and yet we know behind the scenes God is there. The word Megillah, in fact, comes from the Hebrew word legalot, which means to reveal something. The word Esther comes from the word Hester, which means to conceal. Hester Panim, God conceals his face. So the phrase Megillat Esther could mean the scroll of Esther, but it could also mean to reveal something that's hidden. But when we read that Megillah, when we read through the story, we're revealing God's influence by seeing those events and how they all interplay and how they all interact with one another. If we were to write a Megillah of our lives, if we were to write a diary with all of the events in our lives, we would also see God's hand playing through our lives as well. We would see how we have been brought through different trials and tribulations and guided through different things and brought to the place that we're at. This is also why, by the way, on Purim we dress up and get drunk. Okay? It's not an excuse for a party. Okay? We can dress up any day of the year. We drink alcohol all the time, but specifically on Purim we have a mitzvah to get drunk. This does not mean that we should end up in casualty. Okay? Contrary to some belief, some people, and it's not okay. But to get drunk, to not be able to tell the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Orah, okay? What does it mean? Why are we dressing up and getting drunk? So we dress up to go through an act of Hester, of concealing who we really are, putting the mask on, just as God hides himself from the real world so that we can't see God's hand interacting, we can't see those miracles taking place every day. We put a mask over our face to sort of hide ourselves, like playing the part of God, we're hiding ourselves. And so why do we get drunk? So the Gemara says, Nechnas Yayin Geitzei Soy, that when you get drunk, the real person comes out. Sometimes the real person is not as attractive as the person who put all the right filters in place. But the real person comes through. So we're being megala, we're revealing the real person through that mask. That's the minhag, that's what we do on Purim. We hide ourselves and we reveal ourselves to go through the same thing. So when we look through our lives, we have to see the hand of God guiding us all the way. The chaos theory helps us to understand the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says that God could interact in the world through these very subtle changes. We understand that our part, our responsibility, is to keep mitzvahs, to do what God wants us to do. As it says in the end of Koheles, Soif Davar HaKol Nishmais HaElokim Yirah Ve'espes V'tzai Shemo Ki Zeh Kol HaAdam. The end of the matter, when everything's being considered, your job is to keep mitzvahs, keep the Torah, because this is all of mankind. We don't have access to understand if the leaf goes this way or this way, or we choose our breakfast cereal one way or the other, what effect it has. God knows, that's his domain. We do know, however, to do a mitzvah brings us to a better place. To do an aveira separates us from God, and that's our responsibility. We should be zeicher to see many, many miracles in our lives, even if they don't appear directly and immediately, but to have that caring, wonderful hand of God in our lives at every step. Thank you very much. Hey, yes. You are allowed to ask questions, conclusions or questions. That's okay, don't apologise. Please ask questions.
I know that's a very big question, but
Yeah.
everything you said tonight, how, we're all people here who are in relatively good health. How does all this apply to either people who are unfortunate enough to have a very, very serious chronic disease which
Yep.
really ruins their quality of life, or someone who has a big illness, and also what about something like a shower?
Yeah.
I mean, how does...
Brilliant.
I can't quite connect.
Right, fantastic. And we're not supposed to be able to connect it because it's very easy to say God's with me and God's helping me through my life and I'm successful and healthy and everything else. Very difficult to see it at the other side. So the shower is a very big question which I can't get into, although I would say that there were people who went through the shower, who stood in the lines of gas chambers saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So there were people who kept their faith, but how can I comment on something like that? I was born long after the show and have no connection to it. All I can do is listen to survivors and listen to their story and marvel at their survival. But I do see a lot of tragedy. Okay? As a rabbi, unfortunately, you see a lot of tragedy. And I'll start to answer your question by telling you what the response should not be. We don't have access to God's world, to God's logic, or his understanding of the greater plan for creation. We don't have access to that. So we are forbidden to say that when we see a person suffering, that we know that that's because they're being brought to something better or that it's somehow perfecting creation in some way. We are forbidden to say that because to us as human beings, as mere mortals, we must see that as something absolutely terrible and tragic and deal with it as we see it. However, having said that, there is an idea, a philosophical idea in Judaism, which is that ultimately there is a larger picture. There is a larger picture that goes beyond the physical world. That physical suffering in this world could be, not always, but could be related to the idea of paying back a debt in this world in order to be able to receive a full benefit and a full schar in the world to come. Meaning, so there is a philosophical idea. You cannot apply it to personal examples or to other people. Okay? So, because you don't know, you don't have access to that information. There is an idea, because we're told in the verse in Leviticus not to behave to God in a way of happenstance, to believe that there is a system. That's the only responsibility that we have. We have to believe that there's a system and we have to believe that God's guiding hand is there all the time. What we cannot do is say, I know that God's guiding hand is there and he's making that person suffer for this particular reason. It is painful. The world is a painful place. It can be terrible. I mean, I myself, in a short time in the honest, I've seen terrible tragedies. But that doesn't stop me believing that God is there and that there is a greater plan that goes beyond our comprehension and our logic. So the two things are not a contradiction. I mean, you're right. I mean, I certainly have not suffered anything like the sort of tragedies that I've seen. But at the same time, I also, as every human being goes through life, suffers from other trials and tribulations, periods of difficulty. Everyone goes through periods of difficulty in their lives. And they can't see, it's very difficult to see God's guiding hand when you're suffering. No matter what suffering is. And yet, for a person to come out of it and see later down the line that this brought them to a better place or brought them in a different direction, that's a whole different thing entirely. That we do have an obligation. We do have an obligation to say that there's a guiding hand, there's God there, and we don't understand all of the details, but ultimately there is a system that we have to follow. So the other thing that I would say is that, something that comes up quite a lot are what I would call hashgacha protest stories. Okay? Stories about divine providence. Okay? So I'll give you an example. There's one of these apocryphal stories of the guy who's sitting on the aeroplane. They're about to take off, and he suddenly realizes he left his tefillin in the terminal. So he begs with the stewardess, "Can I go and pick up my tefillin from the terminal?" And she relents and she says, "Yeah, you can go, but the plane is about to take off, so you're going to miss the plane, you're going to have to buy another ticket." He says, "Fine, I want my tefillin, I'm not going to leave them in the terminal." He gets off the plane, he goes and gets his tefillin, the plane takes off, and of course that plane then crashes, and he's saved because of his tefillin. Okay? So these stories, and there were hundreds of these stories, after 9/11, the fact that 9/11 occurred during the period of Slichos, right, when Jews were spending a little extra time davening at Shacharis because we were saying Slichos, meant that there were many Jews who did not end up going to work that morning until they were told that the planes had crashed into the Twin Towers and they escaped. So does that mean that those people who escaped, the guy who went back for his tefillin, and the people who were saying Slichos were like special in some way? Does that mean that we should all celebrate this person because he was saved? Chas v'shalom. There was a whole plane of people who just died. There were thousands of people who were killed. We're saying those people are not righteous. So you can see, we have to be very careful. We do not have the ability or the right to say that we know how the system works in detail. All that we can do, and our only obligation, is to believe that there is a system. Okay. Yeah.
I have a colleague who was a Christian scientist,
Yeah.
and they don't believe in medicine. So if you're sick, you prayed, and if God wants you to get better, you will, and if He doesn't want you to get better, you won't.
Right.
He had a minor heart attack when he was about 40, got no medical help at all. 2 years later, he had a bigger heart attack and he died. Now, his family's response was, it was God's will that he died.
Right.
My feeling was, if he'd actually been to see a doctor and got medical help, he would have lived.
Right.
So where does God, if it was God's will for him to die, and therefore he died, if so, what help should he medicine have done, and vice versa?
No. Well, God's will is that human beings have an intelligence that we are able to find cures for diseases. God created an imperfect world. Okay? We're told that we are here in this world to help perfect creation, which includes finding cures for terrible diseases. So when God gives us that gift of intelligence and technology and helps us to find cures for diseases, that's what He wants us to do. There is something called hishtadlut in Hebrew. The word hishtadlut means to put effort into something. Right? God says explicitly, do not rely on miracles. Okay? If I wanted to cross the road because I'm going to shul, right? But the road is a very busy road and the traffic lights are that way and it's too far to walk. So what am I supposed to do? Say, well, I don't need to look where I'm going. I'm going to shul, I'm doing a mitzvah. God will look after me. So I'm supposed to just walk out into the road and God will stop the traffic? This is stupid. Okay? That's not how we think. That's complete nonsense. So when a person suffers from a heart attack, they've got to go and see a doctor. Yeah, you've also got to daven. Why do we have to daven? Because we want God to make sure that the treatment works. Ultimately, you're right, God is behind it all. If the treatment is supposed to work or the treatment is not supposed to work, God will know. But we're not allowed to rely on miracles. We have to put the effort in to make sure that whatever treatment is necessary is administered to the person who needs it. So this whole idea that we sort of just lie back and wait to see what happens because God will make him better is nonsense. It's not a Jewish idea. So it's a sad tragedy on taking a Torah idea and having it twisted in some way that is totally anathema to Judaism. To Jewish thought.
Oliver Cromwell said, trust in God, but keep your powder dry.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Sorry.
Use that as an example. How do you know that it might not be better if there's a finite limit of resources that you don't take medicine because you're then allowing somebody else to have medicine?
Okay, that's a good question, but there are halachas related to that. If you have a limited set of resources, there are ways of determining who should get the medicine. Okay, in fact, in the NHS, they do this all the time. They have a limited number of beds, and the general principle is a very complex area of medical ethics, but the general principle is that, and which is true in Jewish law as well, if you know you can save somebody compared to somebody that has a difficult prognosis, then you make sure that you save the person that you know will survive, even if they happen to be older or whatever it happens to be. Okay, when I was training in medical physics, we did a unit on quality of life years. So you look at a person to see how old they are, whether they're a smoker or not, all these sorts of other factors that come into play to try and determine who you should prioritize in terms of treatment. It's never simple. I'm never sure if the systems are followed in a particularly halachic way or Jewish way, but there are halachas. There are ways of dealing with that. The difficulty is more about the question of what does God want? Well, God wants us to make sure that we use as many resources as possible to treat as many people as possible to help them get better. Okay? That's explicit. Yes, and then yes.
Going back to the quote you did earlier about if you treat God casually, then you were relating it to it doesn't really exist, everything is totally random. Doesn't it equally apply to people who wanted better terminology, are blatantly Jewish, their hats are wide, their titties hang out, their beards are very long, and they still abuse, they still cheat, because I'm obviously a frum Jew, dubbing 15 times a day, I can get away with these other bearers, they're not so serious because I double enough.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that's how they think. I think that they look, everybody has tivers, everybody has temptations and things like that. And you're right, the person who is orthodox, the person who professes to be orthodox, to be frum, should behave like that, because it's in some ways a greater chilul Hashem for a person who is outwardly observant to do something wrong than it is for someone that perhaps isn't. But that's it's still bad one way or the other.
But isn't it also about people? I'm doing all this to you guys, so I can get away with it.
I don't think that's how people think. I mean, it could be how some people think. I don't think that's how they think. I think they think that they. I mean, I think that most people justify what they do in the same way that we all do. We all rationalize doing a particular avail. Let's take the cheeseburger example. Right? So I could wait in line to get my kosher burger from the White House on Goldsby Road, right? And it would be very nice. But that'll give me less time to learn Torah later. So I'll just have the cheeseburger now. God won't mind, because I need more time to learn Torah. Okay? So I mean, that's a very crude example, but we all rationalize in that way. I mean, have I told you about the chocolate cake story? No? Okay, so let me tell you the chocolate cake story. This is Moshe Friedman's famous chocolate cake story. Okay, I want you to imagine yourself, you're at home alone, and you're a little thirsty, so you go to the fridge to get a glass of orange juice, healthy orange juice. Okay, a dietitian will tell you there's got a lot of calories in it, but you know what, it's pretty healthy. As you open the door to the fridge, there is a chocolate cake. And this chocolate cake is one of the really nice ones with the little flakes of chocolate on the top and the cherries around the side and the cream and everything else. And you know that it's 11 o'clock, it's really not time for chocolate cake. The problem is that someone's already taken a slice. So if you take a little slither, then no one's going to notice, right? But it's bad for you, so you shouldn't be having it. But what really is chocolate cake? If you think about it, what is it? What is it made of? Flour. Okay. Flour comes from wheat, which is a type of vegetable. Okay. Oil is vegetable oil. It comes from vegetables, right? Sugar comes from sugar beets. It's a type of vegetable. Chocolate comes from chocolate beans, which are like fruits. Okay. Cream has got protein in it, calcium. It's got very good stuff. By the time you finish, this thing is like a salad. Right? And you take one slither, and it tastes good, but by the time you finish with it, half the thing's gone. And then you're sitting there thinking, how on earth did that happen? right? The answer is we rationalize. We rationalize because we know what we want and we're trying to work out why it should be right for us, okay? And if someone was standing there observing, they would be like, what are you doing? You're being an idiot. Stop doing that. But often these things happen when we're on our own, we rationalize. So I think that most people rationalize the sins that they do. And look, everyone is in a state of growth, right? Everyone should be looking to grow. And you might have a person who's wearing a big black hat and long tzitzis and everything else, and in fact, maybe they're not child abusers, and they're not eating treif, and they're not committing fraud. But they're not growing. They're on a plateau. And yet you've got somebody else who perhaps wasn't brought up in a religious background, but is growing. They're learning little bits. They've given up cheeseburgers. They're working on Shabbos. That person is growing. That's unbelievable. What God wants us to do is grow wherever we are. So every one of us should grow. I'll tell you another story about fraud later on. But let's have some questions.
Just to go back to Tony's example.
Yeah.
Take something like Stu Henson. Brilliant man. Heads the world with my bits and so on and so forth. Makes a Jehovah's Witness. Had a terrible disease, needed a blood transfusion, refused to have one,
Yes.
and died.
Yes. Very sad.
Very sad.
Very sad.
Take somebody else who had HIV disease, had a blood transfusion, and needed, and then discovered that they developed the human form of bad cow disease or contracted HIV.
Right.
How does the two square? Because either way, a tragedy happens.
Okay. So you're asking the question, when you try to do the right thing, stuff can still go wrong and it's out of your control. Okay. That is a feature of the world in which we live. And you can ask the question, you want to ask the question, if I'm not mistaken, so why didn't God make sure that that blood wasn't contaminated, whatever it is? So again, but it goes back to the issue that God gave human beings control over what we do. So whoever it was that took the blood in the first place, that didn't test it, or the blood got contaminated in some way, that's a human error, that's not God. In the same way that the classic response to the Holocaust is, where was God? Why didn't God step in? How could this happen if God exists? It's asking the wrong question. The right question is, how could this happen because of man? How could man do such a thing? So, all of these questions, of course God could make a miracle, but God doesn't make miracles like that. God doesn't make open miracles where, infected blood becomes pure blood, even if we didn't notice, right? It doesn't work like that. The world is a real world, which is, it depends on what we do, and our choices make a real difference. Okay? There are subtle things which God might change, but, again, you're asking on the finer points of the system. So we don't have access to that. We don't have access to it, and so the real answer is we don't know.
Yes, like God oversees the scheme of things.
Okay, so if God saw that there was infected blood and that person had to live and whatever, he could switch.
I mean, it's part of the...
Okay, I'm saying that. But God can do whatever he wants. Why certain people end up suffering and dying and why other people don't, that's a very good question. I'm not going to be able to answer that. That was the question Moshe Rabbeinu asked. He didn't get an answer to it. It's not our domain. Okay? And why certain people will end up suffering and why certain people won't, and all the whys and wherefores, it is a brilliant question. Okay? We're going to have to wait until the Yemaya Mashiach, and then these God things will be revealed. Because think about the story of Esther. When the Jewish people were going through that, until chapter 6, it looked like death and destruction. Everything looked like death and destruction. Just one person, the entire Jewish people. And yet, it switched around. Okay? I'll leave you with a little idea. Okay? We say in Shir HaMalbis, right, the psalm that we sing just before we bench on Shabbos, okay? Then, meaning in the days of Mashiach, our mouths will be filled with laughter and joy. Okay? What's it talking about? Because the whole psalm is talking about the days of Mashiach. Those who sow with tears will reap with joy. All of these sorts of things. What is laughter? Why do we laugh at things? So when someone tells a joke, and I'm not going to try and tell you a joke at this late hour, but if you heard a funny joke, okay, I'll tell you an idea about humour that might make you laugh. Okay, the difference between British humour and American humour. American humour is you have a picture of a woman, fat woman, she's walking along the street, and the shot goes and there's a banana skin on the floor. Fat woman with banana skin, she's approaching the banana skin, she steps on the banana skin, and she falls over. British humour is the fat woman's walking on the street, there's a banana skin, fat woman, banana skin, sees the banana skin, steps over it, but falls down and manly. So why did you laugh? Why? Why? No. Why was that funny? Because it was unexpected. Something was going in one direction and suddenly it switched. So when it comes to Geula, when it comes to redemption, when it comes to Mashiach, exactly the same thing will happen. Just as in Megillas Esther, everything looked like it was going in one direction. At chapter 6, it switches. You think that Haman is going on the horse? Haman thinks he's sitting there. Who does the king want to honor? It must be me. Let's put him on a horse, dress him in the king's robes, lead him through Shushan. Suddenly, do it for Mordechai. That is brilliant. That is funny. And when it comes down to it, and he's sitting at the meal, and Esther says that there's a person who wants to kill me and the Jewish people and everything, and it's Haman, and he's crying on the couch that Esther is sitting on. That's a very good punchline. The Yemot HaMashiach is like a punchline to a joke. When you see, you realize what the whole build-up was all about. And all of these wonderful questions, why did that person suffer? Why did the Holocaust happen? Good things happening to bad people and bad things happening to good people, all of that will become revealed. We don't have access to it. Okay. I once had a situation where I was, just to round up with your question about, people in black hats and long beards doing things that they're not supposed to. I was sitting in my office in Norfolk once, and this is when my entire life almost flashed before me. The phone rings. Okay? It's not an uncommon thing to do. I answer the phone, and the guy says, hello, can I speak to Rabbi Friedman? He says, yes, it's Rabbi Friedman. He says, this is DCI Colin Green from the Serious Fraud Squad. Could you answer a few questions for me? Yes. So we're investigating a serious fraud that's been taking place in Stamford Hill. Do you have any connection to the Stamford Hill community? No. Thank you very much for your time, Rabbi Friedman. We'll speak to you if we need anything else from you later on. It's the phone. And my heart is like this, right? So obviously there's another Rabbi Friedman out there somewhere who's been a little bit of a naughty boy. But wasn't. So I was thinking to myself, your question is a very good question, right? People wearing big black hats, long beards, and so on and so forth. My great uncle, Zichron Levrocha, Reverend Leslie Harper, he once said, and I'll leave you with this thought, right? He said, better a Jew without a beard than a beard without a Jew. Okay. Have a good evening.